The moment Richard Langford said this entire project would move twice as fast if my son were running it, the room fell into a silence so sharp I could hear my own heartbeat pulsing behind my ears. I was seated at the far end of the glossy conference table, the lone woman representing operations in a boardroom full of men, and I felt every subtle shift of attention slide toward me. They pretended his comment was casual, harmless even. It wasn't. It was calculated, a cleanly aimed strike meant to land exactly where it hurt. Elias Mercer, founder of Windhaven Systems, leaned back in his chair without reacting. The board waited on him the way people wait for a verdict, but he said nothing, not yet. Richard clasped his hands together, his gaze fixed on me as if daring me to respond. Connor understands the urgency our clients expect, he went on. Bella prefers a slower, more deliberate method. He lingered on that last word like it was an accusation. Connor Langford sat 2 chairs down, immaculate suit, perfectly rehearsed expression, wearing the smug ease of someone who had never had to fight for relevance. When our eyes met, he lifted one eyebrow, already envisioning the outcome. I felt the resignation letter tucked into my notebook long before I reached for it. I had printed it the night before, not because I wanted to leave, but because I understood exactly how unstable the ground beneath me had become. Richard hadn't arrived at this moment accidentally. He'd been setting it up for weeks, and the satisfaction in his tone confirmed it. I stood carefully. "If you want your son leading the project," I said evenly, "then this is yours." I placed the folded letter on the table. Connor's smile widened, sharp and victorious. Elias finally spoke. "Fine." His voice was cool, unreadable. "Give the project to his son." Richard released a breath like a man who'd just won a private war. Connor straightened, already claiming the space. Then Elias looked at me. "Bella, meet me in 10 minutes. Bring the letter." His voice held no warmth, no irritation, nothing at all, and somehow that was the most unsettling part. I left the boardroom holding the paper, knowing with absolute certainty that whatever waited behind Elias Mercer's door would alter far more than my role at the company. When I moved to Portland 10 years earlier, I never imagined my work would be weighed in rooms where nepotism quietly decided value. I arrived with a single suitcase, a second-hand laptop, and the stubborn conviction that effort could buy security. Windhaven Systems was supposed to be part of that promise. In my early years, Richard Langford barely acknowledged my existence. A stiff nod in the hallway was the most I ever got, and at the time, that indifference felt manageable. It was nothing compared to what followed. "Bella, you always know which fire to put out first," my former director Lacey Monroe once told me, and she meant it as praise. During the pandemic, when everything broke at once, I worked 14-hour days stitching together processes that kept 2 failing contracts alive. Lacey called me her anchor. Richard called it coincidence. That was when I realized we weren't living in the same reality. Connor joined soon after, introduced by Richard at a staff meeting with a proud hand on his shoulder. "Fresh perspective," Richard said, his eyes landing on me as if experience were suddenly obsolete. Connor shook my hand, smiling politely. "I've heard your operations work is consistent," he said, pausing just long enough to turn the compliment hollow. From there, the erosion was subtle but relentless. Meetings I should have attended suddenly didn't require operations input. Reports I authored came back revised, my name missing. Verified data shifted before it reached the board, smoothing over Connor's missteps while erasing my corrections. When I raised concerns, Jake lowered his voice and told me the truth. "We see it, we just can't challenge him. You know how Richard operates." I did, and I felt the ground tilt long before Richard tried to shove me off it entirely. Connor moved through Windhaven like the place had been built for him, armed with an expensive education and a surname that opened doors faster than competence ever could. His handshake was firm, practiced, and empty. "Looking forward to learning from you," he said his first week, though the tone made it clear he didn't intend to. He edited my reports under the guise of refinement, introducing mistakes I later had to fix. In meetings, he interrupted me mid-sentence, claiming ownership of workflows I'd designed. Jake almost corrected him once, but I stopped him. Public humiliation would only strengthen Richard's narrative. Mariah later pulled me aside, whispering that Connor had dismissed us as outdated, steady but old-fashioned. Each push from Connor earned him more praise from Richard. "He sees where we're headed," Richard said, repeating phrases that soon echoed through the boardroom. "Modernization, new leadership energy, cutting inefficiencies." Each time, their eyes drifted toward me. I began documenting everything without knowing exactly why, only that I would need it. Emails, timelines, inconsistencies. Richard stopped treating me like a colleague and started treating me like an obstacle, and I needed to understand why removing me felt worth the risk. The performance update that arrived in my inbox confirmed it. My name appeared once, buried at the bottom. Operations support provided as needed. I forwarded it to my team. Jake replied immediately, asking where the mitigation metrics and contract salvage work were. "Ask Richard," I wrote back, knowing he wouldn't. In the next leadership meeting, Richard projected the revised report and blamed inefficiencies on outdated workflows. My workflows. Connor pitched a faster pipeline, cutting steps required by contract. When I pointed out the risks, Richard smiled thinly. "Contracts can be adjusted." "Not without disclosure," I replied. The room held its breath before someone echoed Richard's language. "We need progress, not resistance." Elias Mercer watched it all from the head of the table, silent, observant. By the end, it was clear the board didn't just hear Richard, they believed him, and Elias's silence meant he saw exactly what was happening and was letting it unfold. Elias's office door was already open when I arrived, resignation letter still warm in my hand. He didn't ask me to sit. "Close the door, Bella." I did. He nodded at the paper. "You brought this today?" "Yes." "Why?" "Because Richard has been clearing space for his son for months," I said. "Today wasn't sudden. And if I stayed quiet, I'd become the justification for dismantling the project." Elias studied me carefully. "What do you think Connor can't manage? The dependencies, the contracts, the risk structures built during the pandemic. Remove the wrong piece and it all collapses." He exhaled slowly. "I suspected as much. That Richard has been manipulating the data," he said, "presenting selective metrics, covering Connor's errors. I needed proof. And now you have it." He slid a business card across the desk. "North River Analytics." I stared at it. "You want me there?" "I want you somewhere Richard can't distort your work or the outcome. If you resign, I'll accept it, but your contribution shouldn't be buried under his politics." The card felt heavier than it should have. Elias wasn't pushing me out, he was repositioning me on a board I hadn't known we were both playing on, and I understood that stepping outside the company might be the only way to protect what came next. North River Analytics welcomed me with polite smiles and a stack of documents taller than my forearm. My short-term contract was framed as a neutral operational review, but the way their director, Dana Caldwell, looked at me told a different story. "We appreciate you stepping in," Dana said, handing me the first binder. "Windhaven's reports haven't aligned with our projections for months," Elias said. "You're the only person who can clarify the gaps." Only person. The words tightened something in my chest. I sat at a small table near Dana's office and opened the top file. The first page showed a timeline. I recognized my original workflow from Windhaven, but the next few pages were wrong. Steps removed, milestones relabeled, numbers smoothed into suspiciously neat patterns. I flagged one line and called Dana over. "Where did this come from?" "Richard sent it," she said. "He said the operations team approved the adjustments." I kept my voice steady. "I never approved any of this." She frowned. "Then why does his report claim you streamlined these processes?" "Because he needed Connor to look like a miracle worker." But I did not say that yet. 2 hours later, Dana returned with another file. "Bella, look at these data logs. They don't match your original dependencies." She was right. They didn't. The logs timestamped as Connor's efficiency breakthroughs were identical to risk drafts I had written months earlier, drafts I never released. I called Jake at Windhaven. "Did Richard access my archived files?" He hesitated. "Bella, he asked for credential overrides, said it was for a board audit. I didn't think it was fine, but I said, quietly though it wasn't. When I hung up, my hands were trembling. North River's documents weren't revealing a misunderstanding, they were revealing a pattern. Richard hadn't just altered reports, he had rewritten the truth brick by brick, hiding something deeper. And whatever he was hiding was dangerous enough to risk destabilizing the very company he claimed to protect. By the third day at North River, the files stopped whispering and started screaming. Every document I opened pointed to the same architect, Richard Langford. I laid 3 reports side by side on the table. Dana hovered behind me as I traced a line with my finger. "This projection," I said, "is built on Connor's supposedly improved throughput." Dana leaned closer. "But this log," she tapped the second page, "shows the original error streak. It shows your error streak." I corrected her. "This was my preliminary draft. Connor copied it and changed the timestamps." She sucked in a breath. "How many?" "Enough to make incompetence look like brilliance." The next file was worse. It contained budget reallocations I had never authorized. Tens of thousands shifted into Connor's pilot project. I flipped to the final page. "Here," I said, "he wrote that the savings came from my department. That is impossible." Dana's voice dropped. "Bella, this is intentional." I nodded. "He inflated Connor's performance metrics and buried every mistake under my name, and Richard approved all of it." Dana stepped out of the room and returned with the compliance lead. "Marcus North's system flags inconsistencies." Marcus said, "Your findings triggered an automatic audit." I didn't celebrate, I didn't gloat, I simply handed him the folder. "These are the discrepancies. Use them however protocol requires." He scanned the pages and let out a low whistle. "This isn't sloppy, this is deliberate manipulation." "Send it to Elias Mercer," I said, "and the board. They need to see it exactly as it is." Marcus nodded. "We will, today." By late afternoon, North River's formal audit packet was already en route to Windhaven Systems, complete with signatures, timestamps, and confirmation that the altered files originated under Richard's authority. The facade he had built, slide by slide, meeting by meeting, was coming apart under its own weight, and one way or another, Richard was going to have to face the truth he'd buried. The emergency meeting happened less than 24 hours after North River sent the audit. I wasn't invited, but Jake called me the moment he stepped out of the boardroom. "Bella, it was a disaster," he whispered. I could hear voices behind him, raised and frantic, cracking under pressure. Then Elias's voice cut through steady and cold. "Richard, explain the discrepancies." There was a rustle, a stammer, then Richard's strange reply. "Those logs were taken out of context." Elias didn't soften. "North River traced the files to your authorization, not context, control." Another voice followed, Helen Ross from the board, sharpening the blow. "You misled us, Richard, for months." Connor tried to jump in. "Dad didn't mislead anyone. The data was misinterpreted."
"Sit down, Connor," Elias said. No anger, just command. "Your revised workflow collapsed the minute Bella stepped out. The audit shows you removed required steps from a federally monitored contract." Connor's breath caught on the line. "She could have helped if she hadn't quit." Helen cut him off. "She quit because the two of you pushed her out." Jake whispered, "Bella, you should have seen their faces." Another board member spoke next. "Connor will step down from all project authority effective immediately." Connor sputtered, "You can't." Elias overrode him. "And Richard Langford is suspended pending full investigation." The room fell into a long, heavy silence. I could almost feel it through the phone. Fortunes shifting, reputations cracking like glass under weight. Then Helen said something I didn't expect. "We owe Bella Harrington an apology." Jake exhaled. They all nodded, even Elias. I pressed my hand to my chest, grounding myself, keeping my voice steady. "Noted." I ended the call before the emotion could spill over. Justice was finally unfolding, but I still didn't know what that meant for me. Elias chose a small cafe near the Willamette River, far from Windhaven's glass walls and sterile conference rooms. When I walked in, he was already seated, a cup of untouched coffee in front of him. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Bella, sit." I did, keeping my posture steady, even as my nerves hummed beneath my skin. He folded his hands. You handled this with remarkable discipline. I met his eyes. I handled the truth, that was all. That, he said quietly, was exactly what I needed you to do. I frowned. You needed me to leave Windhaven. I needed you outside Richard's reach, he replied. If you stayed, he would have buried you under enough false trails to confuse even the board. North River was the only place he couldn't tamper with your work. I let that settle. The resignation that had felt like an ending had been part of a larger plan, one I hadn't known I was standing inside. Elias leaned forward. Accuracy has always been your strength. You do not inflate numbers. You do not chase politics. You simply work in truth, and that is rare. I stayed silent, waiting. He placed a folder on the table. This is a long-term independent contract. You would consult for North River, and for me directly, not as an employee, but as a partner. The word landed like a steady pulse in my chest. A partner? I repeated. Yes, Elias nodded. You will lead the operational architecture for the intercompets we begin next quarter. No internal sabotage, no political interference, full autonomy. I breathed in slowly, letting the weight of it settle. Not a return, not a second chance inside Windhaven, something entirely different, something that didn't require me to shrink to survive. I'll review the contract tonight, I said. Elias allowed the faintest smile. Take your time. This is your future to choose. As I left the cafe, I realized the vindication I had imagined, walking back into Windhaven victorious, was too small for the life opening in front of me. I signed the consulting contract with North River on a quiet Tuesday morning. No ceremony, no handshakes beyond Dana's warm smile. The signature felt less like closure and more like oxygen, finally reaching a part of me I had starved for too long. Later that afternoon, as I reviewed the first phase of Elias's upcoming initiative, Jake called. His voice was steady in a way I hadn't heard in weeks. It's official, he said. Richard's suspension became a full termination. Connor's out too. They said the falsified reports were enough to void any appeal. I exhaled slowly. It was their doing, not mine. Jake, I know, he replied. Everyone knows. He paused before adding, the company is restructuring. Compliance is rewriting half the policies. People keep saying your resignation didn't break Windhaven. The lies about you did. He hung up after promising to stay in touch, and I leaned back in my chair, letting the words settle. For the first time in a long while, I felt neither vindicated nor angry. I felt free. Elias stopped by North River later that week. He didn't knock. He simply appeared in the doorway with that same unreadable calm. Settling in? I am, I said. Good, he replied. There's a second contract coming after this one, larger. You'll lead it. I nodded. I'm ready. As he left, I realized how strange it was to be valued without having to defend my place at the table. I didn't need to return to Windhaven to prove anything, not to the board, not to those who doubted me, and not to the ones who tried to replace me with shortcuts and last names. I stepped out of the office and into the late afternoon light, the city humming around me. I hadn't rebuilt what Windhaven took. I had built something entirely different, something that belonged to me. They once relied on me and pretended they didn't. Now they would rely on the systems I created without ever being able to touch me.